And I just want to talk to you a little bit about, we're going to get to your book in a minute, but just talk to us about your church and just what's going on there and how that inspired you to get to this book.
Justin, for me, it was about 5 years ago where I began to evaluate what success is for a church. And I guess I'd always learned and always thought it's how many people and how much money.
Yeah, we count.
And
that's what we count.
And I realized that no matter what level we hit next, however many people, however much money, then we just set a new level.
Yeah.
and that began to seem empty to me. Like I would never be satisfied and never reach success. Mm-hmm. And so about 5 years ago, we just made a radical transformation. And for me, a very personal transformation in trying to redefine what God's success is for my life. And I began a process. I talked about it some last night. Yeah. And a process of getting out in the real world and connecting with lost people and rediscovering what for me success is. And really that's the book, 3 Questions. Really that's the deal.
Yeah.
Is in my journey, I began to look for a different grid to evaluate my life. And I wanted to opt out of the system of comparing and competing.
Right. So, I mean, that's great to say. So there's a pastor watching this now. I mean, they're listening to that going, man, I just would love to not operate on that old system of, dollars and people in the pew. What's the next step? I mean, how did you said it was a personal journey, but what kind of led you through? What would you say to someone that's struggling with that now? I mean, it's just so hard not to, at general counsel, and it's like you're meeting people, how many in your church? Or, man, that's just that's a natural question. So how do you help someone, or how do you give advice to someone that's going, man, I want to operate on this system. What does that look like?
It's really true. I mean, that is the first question. Yeah. So how many do you run?
Right.
And we have this thought that there's like compartments of heaven, and this is reserved for the people that run 2,000 or more. Yep. Now, if you run 200 or less, this is your little spot of heaven. I reject that.
Right.
And really, for me, the journey started with just reading Paul's letters over and over and over again. Paul, who we now see as success.
Right.
But this is a guy who was beaten, imprisoned, stoned, left for dead.
Yep.
So if I was Paul today, you would not look at me and say, man,
we wouldn't be doing this interview.
I want to go to your pastor's school. That would that would not be the deal at all.
Yes.
And so I just began to reread over and over, looking for what it was in him and how he defined success, because we looked through a very short lens.
Yeah.
And that pastor out there is struggling with that. I think that's a lot of it. We look through a short lens. How many came this Sunday?
Yeah.
And you're only as good. A guy told me when I started, you're only as good as your next sermon. Well, that's incredible pressure.
Yeah, that is.
Paul had to look with a much longer lens.
Yeah.
And learning his lens, and then ultimately, as I studied, I came across what for me was a very approachable grid.
Yeah.
3 questions that I could ask myself every day to evaluate my life and to evaluate success by God's standards instead of by your standards.
Yeah.
I mean, I want you to like me.
Right.
I'm happy if you're impressed with me.
But that's not.
But if I'm living for that, we got a problem.
Right. Now, I mean, that's obvious. We're talking a lot about ministry right now, but I mean, man, we have people in our churches that are in the business world, and I mean, and lots of other different occupations that struggle with this too. I mean, they're trying to find their value by how much sales they have, or how. So this speaks to them.
This is really more for them.
It's really more for them.
It's really,
it came out of your journey.
Yeah, it's really written more for that person who's at the point and trying to decide, how do I be a success? What does that mean? We're on either end of the spectrum. Either we've achieved what we thought was a success, and we found out it's empty, or we're striving for that and wondering if we'll ever get there.
Right.
And when we reorient our life around the grid of grace, it's different, and I'm a different guy than I was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm not proud of what I was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And maybe I never would have got here without going through that.
Right.
But I'm a different guy. I'm more settled. I'm more relaxed. And it shows up in different things. For me as a pastor, nobody knows what our church runs. If you ask me, I won't tell you. Our own church people don't know what our church runs. They ask, say, it's not relevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. That's not the indicator. We're not going to measure ourselves by that. I'm not going to measure my life by that. If you measure your life by how much money's in your bank account, what kind of car's in your garage, what kind of vacation you're taking, how big the house is, in our upgrade society, do I have the newest, the best, the biggest, the most? It wears you out.
You'll never keep up.
It's hopeless.
Yeah.
It's the endless. You're on a treadmill where you're running and running and running and running, and when you're all done, you're at the same place you started.
Man. So what would you say for a church, or pastors listening now, how can they utilize this for their congregation? I mean, we've got samplers available right now on the floor at General Council Exhibit Hall. So if they grab one and then get the book, how do they utilize that within their congregation? I mean, is that a sermon series and then have the people buy the book? What's the best way?
Really, there's a couple ways you can do it. It's excellent for small groups to take 8 weeks and move through it, read it, and read the accompanied passages of Scripture, and then come back together each week and discuss it.
About it.
It's great because it prompts a lot of questions, a lot of challenges. And at the same time, it's great for a pastor to preach over the 8 weeks and let people move through that process with him, read a chapter in the book even.
Yeah.
And then as he talks about that, it's simple. It's written in approachable language. I wish I could tell you it was deep and complex, but I'm not a deep and complex guy.
It takes a very smart person to write a simple book.
I hope
you
that's true.
So,
I hope so.
All right, well, 3 questions. Rod Loy here with us. Thanks so much, Rod, and we're very excited about the book releasing with Influence Resources. You're going to want to get yourself a copy. Thanks for coming, man.
Thanks, Justin.
All right.